Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Sir, I need you to leave. The security guard's voice carried no sympathy, just cold professionalism. Alessandro Cole stood his ground, his jaw tightening as he watched his daughter, Paula, twirl in her wedding dress across the grand ballroom. Her laughter echoed, a sound that once brought him joy, but now felt like daggers to his heart. His ex-wife, Ella, had clearly orchestrated the way the guests pointedly avoided his gaze, creating an invisible barrier around him. I have a right to be here. That's my daughter getting married. Alessandro's voice remained steady, controlled, masking the anger building inside him. The bride specifically requested your removal, the guard insisted, taking a step closer. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. From across the room, Ella approached, her designer dress rustling softly against the marble floor. Her beauty remained undimmed by the years, but Alessandro now saw through the facade to the darkness beneath. Still trying to ruin special moments, Alessandro. Ella's voice dripped with false sweetness. You weren't invited. You need to leave. You've poisoned her against me. Alessandro said, his dark eyes fixed on Ella's face. Turned my own daughter. Your daughter. Ella's laugh was sharp, cutting. She hasn't been your daughter since you abandoned us. Abandoned. Alessandro's hands clenched into fists. Is that the story you're telling everyone? That I abandoned you? Not that I caught you in bed with security. Ella called out, her mask of civility slipping. Remove him. Now 2 more guards appeared, flanking Alessandro. He could have fought them. His body tensed, ready for conflict, but he controlled himself. This wasn't the time or place for what he had planned. This isn't over, Ella, he said quietly, his tone making her step back despite herself. It was over years ago, Alessandro. Go home to your empty house and your bitter memories. As the guards escorted him out, Alessandro caught a glimpse of Paula. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw nothing but contempt in her gaze. His daughter, or the young woman he had raised as his daughter, turned away, dismissing him completely. Outside in the parking lot, Alessandro sat in his car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The memory of 5 years ago surfaced, sharp and clear as broken glass. 5 years earlier, the house was silent when Alessandro returned early from his business trip. He had meant to surprise Ella with her favorite chocolates from Osterland. Instead, he found her phone on the kitchen counter, notifications lighting up the screen. One message preview caught his eye. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to have you in my arms again. Roy. Alessandro stood there, reading message after message, each one revealing years of deception. Photos, intimate conversations, plans made while he was away on business. His hands trembled, not with grief, but with fury. He waited in the darkened living room until Ella returned home. She flipped on the lights and froze, seeing him there. Alessandro, you're home early. Her surprise quickly shifted to charm, but it was too late. He could see through her now. How long? His voice was quiet, dangerous. What do you mean, darling? Roy Alvarez. He held up her phone. How long have you been with him? The charm vanished from her face, replaced by calculation. You went through my phone. How dare you invade my privacy? Your privacy. Alessandro stood, his presence filling the room. What about our marriage vows? What about the trust I placed in you? Oh, please. Ella sneered, dropping all pretense. Trust. You were never here, always at work, always on trips. What did you expect? I expected loyalty. I expected honor. He stepped closer. I expected my wife not to be so unfaithful. The slap echoed in the room. Ella's handprint burned on his cheek, but Alessandro didn't flinch. Get out, she hissed. Get out of my house. Your house. I paid for everything here. Everything you have, I gave you. And I gave you my youth, my best years. Ella's voice turned mocking. Poor Alessandro, so dedicated to his work, so blind to what was happening under his nose. Roy is twice the man you'll ever be. Alessandro's laugh was cold. We'll see about that. Back in the present, Alessandro started his car. The humiliation at the wedding wasn't unexpected. It was part of their pattern, trying to break him. But they had no idea what he was capable of, what he had become in these years of planning. He drove to a modern office building downtown in Creston City, taking the elevator to the top floor. His assistant, Gina Mello, waited at her desk despite the late hour. "They threw you out?" she asked, rising to follow him into his office. As expected, Alessandro loosened his tie. "Is Linda here?" "In the conference room with the files." Linda Morgan looked up as Alessandro entered. Her sharp features focused on the documents spread before her. "How was the wedding?" "Predictably hostile." Alessandro sat down. "What did you find?" "Enough to bury them both," Linda said, pushing forward a folder. "Roy's financial records show a pattern of fraud going back years." "And Ella? She's been siphoning money from your old joint accounts since before the divorce." "Good." Alessandro opened his laptop, pulling up a document titled Project Justice. "Time to begin, then." "Are you sure about this?" Gina asked, not out of doubt but for confirmation. Alessandro's smile was devoid of warmth. "They thought they could humiliate me, break me, turn my own daughter against me. They're about to learn that betrayal has consequences." Linda began organizing the files. "I'll contact our investigator first thing tomorrow, once we have surveillance in place." "No," Alessandro interrupted. "We start tonight. They think this is their moment of triumph, watching me get thrown out of Paula's wedding. Let's use that. They'll be celebrating, careless. Perfect time to begin documenting their mistakes." He turned to Gina. "Contact Derek Jones. I want eyes on them within the hour. Every move, every meeting, every phone call. I want it all recorded." "Already done," Gina replied, holding up her phone. "He's waiting for your signal." Alessandro nodded, satisfaction coursing through him. The years of planning, of watching, of building his resources while appearing defeated, it was all about to pay off. "One thing," Linda said, her tone cautious. "You should know. I did some digging into Paula's birth records." Alessandro held up his hand. "I don't want to know. Not yet. First, we deal with Ella and Roy. That's our priority." He stood, walking to his desk where a chessboard sat, pieces arranged mid-game. He moved a black knight into position. "They think the game is over," he said softly. "They don't realize it's just beginning." The knight stretched ahead, filled with plans and preparations. In his office high above Creston City, Alessandro Cole began his transformation, from victim to victor, from betrayed husband to architect of justice. The pain of betrayal hadn't lessened over the years. He had simply learned to forge it into a weapon. And now, that weapon was ready to strike. The celebration of Paula's wedding lasted well into the night. Champagne flowed freely, toasts were made, and the happy couple danced under crystal chandeliers. But at 2:47 a.m., everything changed with a single phone call. Alessandro sat in his home office, reviewing the surveillance photos Derek had already sent from the wedding reception. The images showed Ella and Roy caught in intimate moments they thought were private. His phone buzzed, Ella's number flashing on the screen. He let it ring 4 times, savoring each desperate ring before answering. "Alessandro." Ella's voice trembled. "Alessandro, I need your help." "Wrong number," he replied coldly, moving to hang up. "Please, the police, they're asking questions about a hit and run near your old house. The victim's car was found in Reynolds Lake. They think I was involved." Alessandro leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips. "And why would they think that?" "Someone saw a car like mine in the area that night. I need you to tell them I was with you. Please, Alessandro, they're talking about murder charges. Let me understand this." Alessandro's voice turned silky smooth. "You want me to provide you with an alibi?" after you just had security throw me out of my daughter's wedding. That was different. This is serious. I could go to jail. Sounds like a personal problem. Daddy, Paula's voice came on the line, thick with tears. Please help Mom. I know we've had our differences, but... Differences? Alessandro cut her off. Is that what you call it? Turning your back on me. Believing her lies. They weren't lies. You abandoned us. Ask your mother about Roy Alvarez. Ask her how long she was with him, while I worked to give you both everything you wanted. Silence filled the line, broken only by muffled sobs. The police will be here soon. Ella came back on, her voice desperate. They're bringing a detective. Please, Alessandro, for old times' sake. Old times. Alessandro's laugh was harsh, like when you told everyone I was abusive, or when you emptied our accounts. Those old times. I'm begging you. Goodbye, Ella. Enjoy your conversation with the police. He ended the call, then immediately dialed another number. Gina. They took the bait. Contact Lucy Rhodes. Tell her it's time for her to unburden her conscience. Within an hour, Alessandro sat in a quiet cafe, watching Lucy fidget with her coffee cup. The woman had aged since he'd last seen her, Ella's former best friend, now a nervous wreck. They'll kill me if they find out I talked to you, Lucy whispered, glancing around the empty cafe. No one knows you're here, Alessandro assured her. Tell me what happened that night. Lucy took a shaky breath. They were drunk, Ella and Roy. They'd been celebrating something at the Indigo Lounge. I was there earlier but left before it happened. They hit someone on Reynolds Road, a man walking his dog, and they panicked. Roy called his friend, Gavin Gray. He helps Roy with certain problems. They put the man's body in his own car, drove it into the lake. The dog ran away. You saw this. Lucy shook her head. Ella came to my house afterward. She was hysterical, drinking more, confessing everything. My security camera caught it all. I've kept the recording, thinking maybe you did the right thing, Alessandro said softly. The recording. She pulled out a USB drive with trembling hands. Here, but please, don't tell them it came from me. Roy's friend, Gavin, is dangerous. He's done things for Roy before. What kind of things? Bad things, really bad. Roy isn't just Ella's lover. He's connected, organized crime, fraud, money laundering. Gavin handles the violent stuff. Alessandro pocketed the USB drive. You're sure about this? About Roy's criminal connections? Positive. Ella. She knows everything. She helps him hide money, creates fake accounts. She's not just a cheater, Alessandro. She's part of their operation. Alessandro stood, placing a hand on Lucy's shoulder. You'll be protected. I promise. Back in his office, Alessandro watched the security footage. Ella, drunk and hysterical, detailed everything. The affair, the hit and run, Roy's criminal enterprise. It was more than he had hoped for. His phone buzzed, a text from Derek Jones. Found Roy's police record, multiple fraud investigations, suspected ties to Martinez cartel. Want the full file? Alessandro smiled. Send everything. Time to introduce Detective Bianca Wallace to our little drama. He turned to his computer, beginning a careful, anonymous email to the detective. Evidence would be released slowly, strategically. Let them sweat. Let them turn on each other. His phone buzzed again. Ella calling. He denied the call, then opened his project file and began a new entry. Day 1. Phase 1 initiated. Targets showing signs of panic. Evidence secured. Lucy Rhodes' testimony recorded. Roy's criminal connections confirmed. Detective Wallace to receive first evidence package tomorrow. He closed the file, satisfaction flowing through him. They thought they were dealing with the same man they had betrayed years ago. They were wrong. That man died the day he found those messages on Ella's phone. In his place stood someone else, someone who had spent years learning patience, cultivating resources, and planning for this moment. The police would be questioning them now, watching their stories unravel. Soon, Roy's criminal connections would surface. The careful facade they had built would crack, then shatter, and Alessandro would be there, watching it all fall apart, piece by carefully arranged piece. Detective Bianca Wallace frowned at the anonymous email in her inbox. Normally, she ignored such tips, but this one was different. Detailed, specific, with attached audio files that made her sit up straight in her chair. The recording played through her computer speakers. Ella Cole's drunken voice confessing to a hit and run, mentioning Roy Alvarez and Gavin Gray. Background checks on all three revealed a web of suspicious activities and connections. Detective Oscar Martin knocked on her door. "The witness is here, the one who saw the car that night." Bianca nodded, clicking through Roy Alvarez's extensive record. Multiple fraud investigations, suspected organized crime connections, but nothing had ever stuck. Until now. In the interview room, the witness, an elderly man walking his own dog that night, described seeing the silver Mercedes swerving on Reynolds Road, hearing a thump, then screaming, dog barking. Then the car sped away. "And you're sure about the time?" "Check my fitness tracker data," he said, pushing forward a printed report. "I walk the same route every night. 11:47 p.m. when I heard the crash." Back at his office, Alessandro watched the investigation unfold through carefully placed sources. Derek Jones had connections in the police department, feeding him updates on Detective Wallace's progress. "They're bringing in Gavin Gray for questioning," Jenna reported, entering with fresh coffee. "And I've got something else you should see." She handed him a folder. Inside were bank statements, dozens of them, all tied to Ella. "She's been busy," Alessandro mused, flipping through the pages. Multiple accounts, all using her maiden name. Money flowing in from Roy's companies, then disappearing into offshore accounts. "There's more," Jenna said. "Those accounts are linked to known money laundering operations. Roy isn't just a fraudster, he's washing money for drug cartels." Alessandro's phone buzzed. Colin Hughes, the investigative journalist he had contacted earlier that week. "Mr. Cole, you were right about those shell companies. I found a pattern going back years. Real estate deals, fake businesses, all funneling money through your ex-wife's accounts." "How did you know?" "Let's meet," Alessandro said. "I have more information you might find interesting." At a quiet bar across town, Colin Hughes scribbled notes as Alessandro laid out the story, carefully edited to protect his own involvement. "So Roy Alvarez uses legitimate businesses as fronts," Colin clarified, "with Ella Cole handling the financial side. And now they're both implicated in a hit-and-run murder, along with Gavin Gray." Alessandro nodded. "This is explosive stuff," Colin said, "but I'll need evidence." Alessandro slid a USB drive across the table. "Bank records, corporate filings, witness statements, everything you need to verify independently." As Colin left with the drive, Alessandro received a text from Linda. "Financial records acquired. You need to see this." In Linda's office, the evidence of Ella's financial misconduct spread across 3 monitors. Bank statements, transfer records, and corporate documents painting a picture of systematic theft and fraud. "She didn't just take your money during the divorce," Linda explained, highlighting transactions. "She's been embezzling from the company accounts for years. Look at these transfers." Alessandro leaned forward, studying the patterns. Each transaction was carefully disguised as a legitimate business expense, but the money always ended up in accounts controlled by Roy's shell companies. "How much?" "Millions," Linda said grimly. "She used her position as your wife to access company accounts, then created a complex web of transfers. The money funded Roy's operations and their lavish lifestyle." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "Send everything to Detective Wallace. Anonymously. Already done. But there's something else." Linda pulled up another document. I found evidence that Roy has been using your company's legitimate contracts as cover for his illegal operations. Each real deal has a shadow deal behind it. Perfect, Alessandro smiled. That gives us leverage over his entire operation. The next morning, Colin Hughes's first article hit the news websites. Local business figure linked to international money laundering operation. The story carefully laid out Roy's criminal connections, with Ella's role heavily implied but not directly stated, yet. Alessandro's phone buzzed continuously with messages from mutual acquaintances, each expressing shock and asking for comments. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the surveillance photos Derek had just sent. The images showed Roy and Gavin meeting in a parking garage, their body language tense and hostile. Another showed Ella entering a law office known for defending organized crime figures. They're scrambling, Jen observed, reviewing the photos. Roy and Gavin had a heated argument. Looks like their partnership is cracking under pressure. Good, Alessandro said. Time to apply more pressure. Release the next batch of evidence to Detective Wallace. The detective received another anonymous email, this one containing detailed records of Gavin Gray's movements the night of the hit and run, along with cell phone tower data placing all 3 suspects in the vicinity. In her office, Detective Wallace organized the growing evidence on her investigation board. Phone records, financial documents, witness statements, and surveillance photos creating a damning picture. I've never had a case where evidence appeared so consistently, she mused to her partner. Each piece fits perfectly with the others. It's almost like someone's orchestrating this, Oscar Martin replied. Maybe someone is, she agreed, but the evidence stands. Back in his office, Alessandro reviewed the final pieces of his plan for Act 1. The evidence was in place, the media was involved, and the investigation was moving forward. Most importantly, his targets were feeling the pressure, making mistakes. Colin's next article runs tomorrow, Jenna reported. This one focuses on Ella's role in the financial crimes. He's got quotes from former employees about suspicious transactions. And Lucy, safely away. We've got her in a secured location, with round-the-clock protection. She's ready to testify when the time comes. Alessandro nodded, satisfaction flowing through him. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The trap was set, and his prey were walking right into it, unaware that their own actions and paranoia would soon tear their alliance apart. Send a message to Detective Wallace, he instructed Gina. An anonymous tip about Gavin Gray's warehouse near the lake. Let's see what her search teams find there. As night fell over Creston City, Alessandro stood at his office window, watching lights flicker in distant buildings. In one of those buildings, he knew Ella and Roy were desperately trying to salvage their crumbling empire. Let them try. The evidence was already in motion, the witnesses in place, and the authorities closing in. This was just the beginning of their downfall, but it was a beginning he had orchestrated with meticulous care. Years of planning, of watching and waiting, had led to this moment. Now, all he had to do was watch as their world collapsed around them, piece by carefully arranged piece. Justice, cold and implacable, was finally catching up to those who had betrayed him. Detective Bianca Wallace stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside Ella Cole's mansion, her team of officers positioned strategically around the property. She checked her watch. 5:47 a.m. Move in, she commanded into her radio. The arrest team breached the front door with practiced efficiency. Inside, they found Ella in her silk pajamas, screaming at the intrusion. What is the meaning of this? Ella demanded, her perfect makeup already in place despite the early hour. Ella Cole, Detective Wallace stepped forward. You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. This is ridiculous. I demand to speak to my lawyer. You'll get that chance, Wallace nodded to her officers. But first, we need to discuss the body in Reynolds Lake. Across town, another team led by Detective Oscar Martin approached Roy Alvarez's penthouse. They found him attempting to flush documents down his toilet. Stop right there. Martin's voice rang out. "Step away from the bathroom. Hands where I can see them." Roy froze, water and shredded papers splashing around his expensive shoes. "I can explain everything." "Save it for your interrogation," Martin replied, cuffing him. "We already have your friend Gavin Gray in custody. He's been quite talkative." In his office, Alessandro watched the arrests unfold through live updates from his surveillance team. Gina entered with coffee and a tablet displaying breaking news headlines. Prominent socialite arrested in murder investigation. Business mogul Roy Alvarez linked to organized crime. 3 arrested in connection with Reynolds Lake murder. Collins' articles are hitting all the major outlets, Jenna reported. Social media is exploding with the story. Alessandro's phone buzzed again. Linda called. "It's done," she said without preamble. Judge Hadley signed the asset freeze orders. Their accounts are locked down. All of them. Everything we could find. Including the offshore accounts Ella thought were untraceable. "She's broke, Alessandro." "They both are." Through his office window, Alessandro watched the sunrise paint the city skyline. "What about the shell companies?" "Frozen. The forensic accountants are having a field day. The fraud goes deeper than we thought. Roy wasn't just laundering money. He was stealing from his own criminal partners." "Perfect." Alessandro's voice held satisfaction. That should keep him busy explaining things to his cartel friends. At the police station, Detective Wallace observed Ella through the interrogation room window. The socialite's composure had cracked, her mascara smearing as she realized the extent of evidence against her. "Mrs. Cole," Wallace entered the room. "Let's talk about the night of March 15th. I want my lawyer." "Of course, but you should know we have your confession on video. The one you made at Lucy Rhodes's house. Very detailed." Ella's face went pale. "That's inadmissible. I was drunk." "Maybe, but the DNA evidence from the victim's car isn't. Neither are the transfer records showing you moved millions through Roy's shell companies. Want to explain those?" In another interrogation room, Roy was falling apart. "Look, this is all a misunderstanding," he stammered. Ella handled the financial side. "I just signed what she told me to sign." "Really?" Detective Martin laid out photographs. "Because we have security footage of you meeting with known cartel members. Care to explain that?" "I want immunity," Roy blurted. "I'll tell you everything about Ella's operation. She masterminded the whole thing." Colin Hughes sat in his editor's office, laying out his next exposé. "This goes beyond a simple murder case," he explained. "We're looking at a criminal enterprise that's operated for years. Money laundering, fraud, connections to international drug cartels." "Any comment from the ex-husband?" his editor asked. "Alessandro Cole." "No, he's maintaining distance. Smart man. But my sources say he's the one who originally built the company they were stealing from. Must be quite a shock." Alessandro's team gathered in his conference room, reviewing the morning's events. Linda spread out financial documents while Gina updated their tracking board. "The DA is pushing for maximum charges," Linda reported. "The evidence is overwhelming. They won't be offering plea deals." "What about Gavin Gray?" Alessandro asked. "Singing like a bird," Gina replied. "He's terrified of Roy's cartel connections, wants witness protection." "Make sure Detective Wallace gets the recordings of his previous activities," Alessandro instructed. "Let's see how much protection he really deserves." By nightfall, the story dominated every news channel. Security footage showed Ella and Roy being led into the county detention center. Their designer clothes exchanged for prison jumpsuits. Their booking photos appeared online. Ella's mask of sophistication completely shattered. Roy's arrogance replaced by fear. Alessandro opened his laptop, updating his project file one last time. Phase 2 completed. Targets in custody. Assets frozen. Media coverage extensive. Public humiliation achieved. Note: Roy attempting to blame Ella. Expected betrayal beginning ahead of schedule. He closed the file, satisfaction coursing through him. The fall had begun, just as he had planned. But this was only the beginning. The real pressure would come from what they discovered in those frozen accounts, secrets that would tear their alliance apart. Ella paced her jail cell, her designer heels replaced by prison slippers. 3 days in custody had stripped away her polished veneer, revealing the desperate woman beneath. "I need to make a call," she demanded of the guard. "It's important." "Your lawyer already visited today." The guard replied disinterestedly. "Not my lawyer. I need to contact Alessandro Cole." In his office, Alessandro listened to the recorded call. Ella's voice tinged with desperation. "Alessandro, please, you have to help me. I know you're behind this somehow. I'll do anything. Give you back the money. Sign whatever you want. Just get me out of here." He pressed delete, turning to Gina. "Any other attempts at contact?" "She's been trying to reach out through mutual friends," Gina reported. "And she's had her lawyer contact Paula, trying to get her to appeal to you." "Has Roy made any moves?" "That's more interesting." Gina pulled up a surveillance report. "He's been meeting with his lawyer twice daily. They're preparing some kind of deal with the DA. Let me guess. He's going to throw Ella under the bus. Already started. He's claiming she masterminded everything, that he was just a patsy who signed documents without reading them." Alessandro's laugh was cold. "Send an anonymous tip to Ella's lawyer. Let her know what Roy is planning." In the women's wing of the county detention center, Ella received the news with a scream of rage that echoed through the corridors. "That backstabbing traitor. Get me my lawyer. Now." Her lawyer, Alan Sherman, arrived looking harried. "Ella, you need to calm down. Calm down. Roy is trying to pin everything on me. We need to strike first. I want to make a deal. The DA isn't offering deals. The evidence against you both is too strong. Then we'll make them want a deal." Ella's eyes gleamed with malice. "I know things about Roy's operation that the police haven't found yet. Names, dates, locations of bodies." In the men's section, Roy was having his own crisis. His lawyer had just informed him that Ella was talking to the DA. "She can't prove anything," Roy insisted, but his hand shook as he ran them through his hair. "She doesn't need to prove it," his lawyer replied. "She just needs to give them enough to investigate. And with your cartel connection." "Don't say that word," Roy hissed, looking around frantically. "If they hear, they already know. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Roy paced his cell. "Contact Gavin. Tell him to handle Lucy. Without her testimony." "Mr. Gray is in protective custody," his lawyer interrupted, "and he's already given his official statement." "Then have someone else handle it. I've got people who can. Your accounts are frozen. All of them. Nobody's taking your calls anymore, Roy." In his private office, Detective Wallace reviewed the latest transcripts. "They're turning on each other," she told her partner. "Just like our anonymous friends said they would." Speaking of which, Oscar Martin handed her a file. Another package arrived, details about 3 unsolved murders possibly connected to Roy Alvarez. "Our tipster's been busy. Almost like they knew exactly where to look," Wallace mused. Alessandro sat in Linda's office, reviewing their progress. Roy tried to arrange a hit on Lucy through his prison contacts. Linda confirmed, but nobody's willing to help him. Word's out about the cartel connection. Nobody wants that heat. And Ella, making wild accusations, claimed she has evidence Roy ordered murders. The DA's office is investigating. But, Linda shrugged. She's desperate, throwing anything at the wall to see what sticks. Perfect. Alessandro stood, straightening his tie. Time for Phase 3. Release the offshore account details to the cartel's lawyers. "You sure about that?" Linda asked. "It'll sign Roy's death warrant. He signed that himself when he stole from them. I'm just making sure they know exactly how much he took." The next day, Roy received a visitor, a cartel lawyer in an expensive suit. The meeting was brief, but Roy emerged white-faced and shaking. I need protection. He screamed at the guards. You have to move me to segregation. They're going to kill me. In her cell, Ella received news of Roy's breakdown with savage satisfaction. Serves him right, she told her cellmate. He thought he could blame everything on me. I'll bury him. But her triumph was short-lived. That afternoon, her lawyer arrived with more bad news. They found your private accounts, Sherman said grimly. All of them. The ones in the Korgan Islands, Sintra, Austerland. That's impossible. Nobody knew about those except. Ella stopped, realization dawning. Alessandro. It had to be Alessandro. Whoever it was, Sherman said, they'd provided documentation of where the money came from. It's all tied to Roy's criminal operations. The DA is adding additional charges. Ella slumped against the wall. Contact Alessandro again. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I'll confess to everything, give back everything. Mrs. Cole, Sherman said quietly, there's nothing left to give back. The accounts are empty, the properties seized, even your personal items confiscated as proceeds of crime. In his office, Alessandro received the news of their desperation with quiet satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Their alliance was fracturing, their resources were gone, and their desperation was leading them to make fatal mistakes. Sir, Gina entered with a fresh report. Ella is trying to contact Paula again. She's claiming she has evidence that you orchestrated this whole thing. Let her try, Alessandro replied calmly. Nobody believes anything she says anymore. He turned back to his window, watching the city below. The pieces were falling into place, each betrayal and accusation driving his targets deeper into their own destruction. Soon, they would have nothing left. No money, no friends, no hope, just as they left him 5 years ago. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Alessandro Cole took his seat in the gallery. His presence commanded attention, though he remained silent, watching the proceedings with calculated interest. The trial of Ella Cole and Roy Alvarez had become the city's most high-profile case in years. District Attorney Sarah Marin approached the podium, her voice clear and confident. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you'll hear over the next few weeks isn't just about a hit and run. It's about years of calculated deception, financial fraud, and murder. In the defendant's box, Ella sat rigidly, her prison jumpsuit a stark contrast to her usual designer wear. Roy, separated from her by their respective lawyers, couldn't stop fidgeting. The evidence will show, Marin continued, that these defendants built their lifestyle on theft, fraud, and ultimately murder. When their crimes were at risk of exposure, they eliminated the threat. Deliberately and with premeditation. Linda leaned close to Alessandro, whispering, "They've arranged the evidence perfectly. Each witness builds on the last, creating an unbreakable chain." Alessandro nodded slightly, his expression unchanged. The DA's office had followed his anonymous suggestions for the prosecution strategy, though they didn't know it. The first witness was the elderly man who'd seen the car that night. It was swerving, like the driver was drunk. Then I heard the impact, a scream, and the car sped away. And can you identify that car? Silver Mercedes, same as the one in those photos. Mrs. Cole's car. Ella's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Next came the forensic accountant. We found a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. Money would move through multiple entities, making it appear legitimate, but it all traced back to criminal enterprises. And who controlled these accounts? Mrs. Cole and Mr. Alvarez jointly. The signatures and authorizations were quite clear. Roy's lawyer attempted to challenge the evidence's authenticity, but the prosecution was prepared, with documentation for everything: dates, times, locations, signatures. The parade of witnesses continued. Former employees testified about suspicious transactions. Business partners revealed how they'd been defrauded. Each testimony added another layer to the prosecution's case. Then came Lucy Rhodes. Ms. Rhodes, Marin began, "Please tell the court about the night of March 15th. Lucy glanced nervously at Ella before speaking. "She came to my house drunk and hysterical. She confessed everything. The hit and run, how they disposed of the body, their whole criminal operation. And you recorded this confession?" "Yes. My security system caught it all." The courtroom fell silent as the video played, Ella's drunken voice filling the room, detailing the crime in graphic detail. Even the most hardened reporters looked disturbed. "We hit him," recorded Ella slurred. "Roy was driving. The man saw something he shouldn't have at the bank. We couldn't let him talk. So when he walked his dog that night." In the defendant's box, the present-day Ella's face drained of color. Her lawyer quickly requested a recess, but the judge denied it. Gavin Gray's testimony came next. Under witness protection, he spoke freely about Roy's criminal enterprises. "He had me dispose of bodies before. The lake wasn't the first time." "How many others?" "3 that I know of. Business deals gone wrong. People who threatened to expose the operation." Roy exploded, leaping to his feet. "You lying coward. You're just trying to save yourself." "Remove the defendant," the judge ordered. As guards led Roy away, he kept shouting threats at Gavin. Through it all, Alessandro watched silently. His plan was unfolding perfectly, the prosecution building its case systematically, each piece of evidence precisely placed for maximum impact. Detective Wallace testified about the investigation. "Once we began looking deeper, we found a pattern of criminal activity spanning years. The hit and run was just the tip of the iceberg." "And the victim?" Marin asked. "Terrence Baxter, bank compliance officer. He had flagged suspicious transactions linked to the defendant's accounts. He was killed before he could file his report. The defense tried to create reasonable doubt, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, witness testimony, surveillance footage, DNA evidence, it all pointed to Ella and Roy's guilt." During a recess, Linda updated Alessandro on the jury's reactions. "They're convinced. You can see it in their faces. The prosecution's timeline matches perfectly with the evidence, and the offshore accounts. Frozen. The forensic team found everything, just like we planned. They won't have a penny left when this is over." The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution laid out years of criminal activity, building an ironclad case. The defense, faced with overwhelming evidence, resorted to desperate tactics. Ella's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of Roy's manipulation. Roy's lawyer claimed she was the mastermind. Their conflicting defenses only strengthened the prosecution's case. Finally, after both sides rested, the jury retired. They returned in less than 4 hours. "On the count of first-degree murder, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Ella Cole, guilty. We find the defendant, Roy Alvarez, guilty." The verdicts continued. Guilty on all counts of money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, murder. Maximum sentences on each charge, to be served consecutively. Ella screamed as they led her away. "Alessandro, I know you did this. I know it was you." He watched her go, his face impassive. Justice had been served, not through violence or illegal means, but through the careful exposition of truth. Later in his office, he updated his project file one last time. Phase 3 completed. Targets convicted on all counts. Maximum sentences secured. Justice achieved through legal channels. Linda brought in champagne. To justice served. Alessandro raised his glass slightly. To consequences. The verdicts made headlines across the country. Colin Hughes's coverage painted a detailed picture of the case, ensuring the public understood the full scope of Ella and Roy's crimes. Alessandro watched the media coverage with satisfaction. His revenge hadn't required violence or illegal acts. He had simply exposed the truth, letting their own actions condemn them. The scales were finally balanced. 2 months after the verdicts, Alessandro sat in his office, reviewing the final reports from his team. The aftermath of the trial had reshaped Creston City's business landscape, exposing corruption far beyond Ella and Roy's immediate circle. The last of the accounts are cleared, Gina reported, placing files on his desk. All assets seized, all properties liquidated. They're left with nothing but prison commissary funds. And Gavin Gray. In witness protection officially, but our sources say he's getting nervous, keeps looking over his shoulder. Alessandro nodded. Gavin's betrayal of Roy and Ella had been useful, but betrayal was betrayal. Keep tracking him. He'll learn that lesson soon enough. Linda entered with more updates. The appeals were denied. All convictions upheld. They'll serve their full sentences. Their lawyers. Drop them. No money left to pay legal fees. Linda sat down, studying Alessandro's expression. You've won, you know. Completely. It was never about winning. Alessandro replied. It was about justice. He stood, walking to his desk where a chessboard sat. The pieces were arranged in checkmate, a game he had started the day of Paula's wedding, played move by move as his plan unfolded. The foundation paperwork is ready, Jenna mentioned. The Cole Foundation for Victims of Domestic Abuse. The press release is scheduled for next week. Alessandro approved with a nod. Make sure the first grants go to organizations helping people rebuild after betrayal. Not just physical abuse, emotional and financial too. Later that evening, Alessandro hosted a private dinner for his core team. Linda, Gina, Derek Jones, and Colin Hughes gathered in a private room at the city's most exclusive restaurant. 2 successful partnerships. Linda raised her glass. And to loyalty, Alessandro added, his gaze moving over each face. These people had proven their worth, their dedication. Unlike Ella and Roy, they understood the value of trust. What's next? Colin asked. After exposing a scandal this big, anything else seems anticlimactic. We focus on building. Alessandro replied. The foundation, new business ventures, strengthening what we have. And watching our backs, Derek added. Success breeds enemies. Let them come. Alessandro's voice held quiet confidence. We're ready for them. The dinner conversation turned to future plans. Linda was expanding her law practice, specializing in helping fraud victims. Gina had proven herself worthy of a promotion to chief operating officer. Derek's investigation firm was flourishing with its enhanced reputation. You've changed all our lives, Jenna observed. You earned it. Alessandro replied. Loyalty deserves reward. Betrayal deserves consequences. After dinner, returning to his office, Alessandro found a letter waiting. The return address showed it was from Greenwood Women's Facility. Inside, Ella's desperate handwriting filled pages with pleas and accusations. She begged for help, then threatened exposure, then begged again, her words showing her unraveling mental state. Alessandro fed the letter into his shredder without reading past the first paragraph. Her words meant nothing now. His phone buzzed. A text from his security team. Gavin Gray had been spotted in a small town 3 states away, living under his witness protection identity. Alessandro sent back a single word. Proceed. Lessons about betrayal needed to be thorough. The next morning, Alessandro reviewed plans for the Foundation's first project, a secure housing complex for people rebuilding their lives after betrayal and abuse. The irony of using Ella's seized assets for this purpose gave him particular satisfaction. The contractors are vetted, Jen reported. Construction starts next month. Good. Make sure they understand our standards. No cutting corners. His new life was taking shape. The pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into something useful, a tool for helping others while ensuring he remained strong. The office hummed with activity. His legitimate businesses were thriving, expanding into new markets. Success was the best revenge, but he never let it make him vulnerable. Sir, Gina interrupted his thoughts. Detective Wallace is here to see you. Bianca Wallace entered, her expression professional but respectful. Mr. Cole, interesting development in the case. Oh, Gavin Gray. He's requesting additional protection. Says he's being watched. The Witness Protection Program should handle that. Alessandro replied smoothly. Should. Wallace agreed, studying his face. But we both know there's more to this story, don't we? Justice takes many forms, Detective. She nodded slowly. Just remember, the law has boundaries. Of course. Alessandro smiled slightly. I always operate within the law. After she left, he returned to his work. The foundation plans needed attention, and new business opportunities awaited. Life moved forward, but he never forgot the lessons learned. Trust, once broken, was gone forever. Loyalty, when proven, deserved reward. And betrayal always had consequences. The truth emerged gradually, then all at once. Media coverage of the trial sparked deeper investigations, revealing the full scope of Ella and Roy's crimes. Colin Hughes's comprehensive series exposed decades of fraud, manipulation, and murder. The public response is overwhelming, Colin told Alessandro, sharing advanced copies of his latest articles. People can't believe the scale of their operation. Truth has power, Alessandro replied, reviewing the documents, especially when it's revealed at the right moment. The articles detailed everything: the money laundering, the murders, the complex web of lies and manipulation. Each revelation sparked new investigations, exposing more criminals connected to their network. In prison, Ella received the articles with increasing despair. Her lawyer delivered the news of each new exposure, each fresh humiliation. They're calling me a black widow, she raged during a prison visit. A monster. They're calling you what you are, her lawyer replied tiredly. The evidence speaks for itself. Meanwhile, Alessandro had one final task. He reviewed the DNA test results again, then the recording of Ella's confession about manipulating Paula. The timing had to be perfect. He arranged to meet Paula at a quiet cafe. She arrived looking nervous, her wedding ring already gone. Her marriage another casualty of her mother's exposure. Why did you want to see me? She asked, hostile but curious. Alessandro placed a folder on the table. Because you deserve the truth. All of it. Inside were the DNA results, along with transcripts of Ella's conversations about manipulating Paula against him. I don't want to see this. She pushed the folder away. Yes, you do, because you've spent years believing lies. Time to face reality. Paula's hands shook as she read. The DNA results were clear. She wasn't Alessandro's biological daughter. The transcripts revealed how Ella had systematically poisoned her against him, using lies and manipulation to turn a child against her father. No, she whispered. This can't be. Your mother's greatest talent was manipulation. Alessandro's voice held no warmth. She used you as a weapon against me, and you let her. I was a child. You're not a child anymore. You made your choices. Tears filled her eyes. What am I supposed to do now? That's not my concern. Alessandro stood. You chose your side. Now you can live with those consequences. He left her there, crying over the truth she had refused to see for so long. It was harsh but necessary. Actions had consequences, and blind loyalty to evil deserved no reward. Back in his office, Alessandro received another update from his security team. Gavin Gray's witness protection wasn't providing the security he had hoped for. Strange incidents kept occurring. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, but enough to ensure Gavin understood the price of betrayal. He's paranoid, Jen reported. Barely sleeps. Jumps at shadows. Good, Alessandro replied. Let him live with that fear. It's more effective than any physical punishment. The final pieces were falling into place. The truth about Ella and Roy's crimes was public knowledge, their empire destroyed, their reputations ruined, their freedom gone. Everyone who had aided them was facing consequences. Alessandro arranged one last visit to the prison where Ella and Roy were held. They were brought to separate interview rooms under heavy guard. He visited Roy first. The once charismatic businessman had deteriorated in prison, his expensive suits replaced by prison denim, his confidence shattered. "Come to gloat?" Roy asked bitterly. "No," Alessandro replied. "I came to make sure you understand why you're here. Because you set us up. Because you were criminals who thought you were untouchable. I simply exposed the truth." Roy lunged forward, but his shackles stopped him. "You destroyed everything." "No, Roy." Alessandro's voice was cold. "You destroyed everything. I just made sure you faced the consequences." Ella's interview room was last. She tried to smile when he entered, but it faltered at his expression. "Alessandro, please," she began. "We could still." "Still what?" He cut her off. "Still pretend you didn't steal from me. Still pretend you didn't murder an innocent man. Still pretend you didn't poison my daughter against me." "Our daughter. Not mine. That's one more lie exposed, isn't it?" Ella's facade cracked. "You did this. All of it. You destroyed us." "No, Ella. You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure everyone saw who you really are." He stood, looking down at her. "Enjoy prison. You'll have decades to think about your choices." As he turned to leave, she called out, "I loved you once." "No," he replied without turning back. "You loved what I could give you. There's a difference." Outside the prison, Alessandro felt no triumph, no joy, just the quiet satisfaction of justice served. The truth had been exposed, consequences delivered, lessons taught. He returned to his office, where Linda and Gina waited with the final reports. "Gary, excuse me, Gavin, tried to file a complaint," Gina said, "but no one believes him. He's just another paranoid felon in witness protection." Alessandro nodded. "He'll live with that fear for the rest of his life." "And Paula?" Linda asked carefully. "She knows the truth now. All of it. Her choices led her here." Alessandro's voice held no regret. "She chose to believe Ella's lies. Now she can live with that decision." His phone buzzed. Another message from his security team monitoring Gavin. The man was unraveling, his paranoia growing by the day. Soon, he would understand that no protection program could shield him from the consequences of his actions. "The Foundation's first shelter opens next week," Gina reported, changing the subject. "Press coverage is confirmed, and your speech is ready for review." Alessandro nodded, satisfaction flowing through him. The money that Ella and Roy had stolen would now help others rebuild their lives after betrayal. It was fitting justice. In his private office, he opened his project file one last time. Final phase complete. Justice served through legal means. All targets facing consequences of their actions. Betrayals exposed and punished. Truth revealed to all parties. Project concluded successfully. He closed the file and turned to the safe, removing the original phone with Ella's messages that had started it all. The evidence of her first betrayal. Now just one piece in a much larger pattern of deception. "Sir," Gina entered with a final update. "Colin's last article just went live. It's all out there now. Everything they did. Everyone they hurt. The public knows the whole story." Alessandro allowed himself a small smile. His revenge hadn't required violence or illegal acts. He had simply exposed the truth, letting their own actions condemn them. Justice served cold and complete. The office lights dimmed as night fell over the city. In their separate prison cells, Ella and Roy faced their first night, knowing that Alessandro had orchestrated their downfall. In his witness protection housing, Gavin Gray jumped at shadows, knowing no program could protect him forever. And somewhere in the city, Paula faced her own harsh truths about loyalty and betrayal. Alessandro stood at his window, watching the city lights. He was changed, hardened by betrayal, but strengthened by justice. He would never be vulnerable again. Trust, once broken, was gone forever. Loyalty, when proven, deserved reward. And betrayal always had consequences. Some said time healed all wounds, but Alessandro knew better. Time didn't heal, it taught, and he had made sure the lessons would never be forgotten. 10 years later, Alessandro Cole stood at the podium of the Cole Foundation's 10th annual gala, his presence commanding as ever despite the decade that had passed. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations, helping thousands rebuild their lives after betrayal and abuse. 10 years ago, he addressed the crowd, "We made a promise to turn pain into purpose. Today, we've helped over 10,000 people reclaim their lives and dignity." In the audience, Linda Morgan and Gina Mello sat at the primary table, both having risen to new heights in their careers. Linda now headed Creston City's most prestigious law firm, specializing in prosecuting white-collar crime, while Gina served as CEO of Cole Enterprises. After his speech, Alessandro joined them at the table. "The new shelter opens next month," Gina reported, tablet in hand. "That makes 23 facilities across the country." "And the legal aid program?" Alessandro asked. "Expanded to 15 states," Linda replied. "We've helped over 3,000 victims recover stolen assets this year alone." The foundation had become their most visible success, but it wasn't their only one. Cole Enterprises had tripled in size, its reputation for ethical business practices making it a model for corporate governance. Detective Wallace called. Gina mentioned casually, "She's retiring next month. Wanted to know if you'd attend her farewell dinner." Alessandro nodded. Over the years, Bianca Wallace had become an unlikely ally. She had never directly acknowledged his role in exposing Ella and Roy's crimes, but they had developed a mutual respect. "Any word from our old friends?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Ella's latest appeal was denied, Linda reported. "She's still in maximum security after that escape attempt 3 years ago." "Roy?" She paused, checking her notes. "Still in solitary. The cartel's second attempt on his life came close." "And Gavin?" Gina's smile held no warmth. "Still running. Changed identities 4 times in the past decade. Never stays in one place more than 6 months. Paranoia's eaten him alive." The lesson had been thorough. Gavin Gray lived, but in constant fear. No witness protection program could shield him from the shadow of his betrayal. Every few months, something would happen. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable, but enough to remind him that his actions had consequences. Colin Hughes. Linda pointed as the journalist approached, recorder in hand. He had parlayed his coverage of the Cole case into a successful career investigating corporate crime. "Mr. Cole," Colin greeted, "care to comment on the 10-year anniversary of the case that changed everything?" "Justice doesn't expire," Alessandro replied simply. "Neither do consequences." After the gala, Alessandro returned to his office. The chessboard still sat on his desk, though he had started many new games since that first one. He never played against others. The game was always against himself, testing strategies and foresight. His phone buzzed with a message from one of his sources at Greenwood Women's Facility. Ella had tried to send another letter, like all the others over the past decade. It would never reach him. She had aged badly in prison, her beauty faded, her manipulation dulled by isolation. The other inmates shunned her, having learned about her crimes. She spent her days in desperate attempts to contact the outside world, but all her bridges were burned. Roy had fared worse. The cartel's revenge had been partially successful. He had survived their attempts but lived in constant terror. Solitary confinement was his only protection, and even that might not be enough forever. "Sir," Gina entered with a familiar file. "The quarterly report on Paula." Alessandro reviewed it dispassionately. After learning the truth about her parentage and her mother's manipulation, Paula had tried to rebuild her life. She moved across the country, changed her name, started over. But the shadow of her choices followed her. "Still seeing the therapist?" he asked. "Twice weekly," Gina confirmed. "She's written several letters asking to meet. File them with the others. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. Paula had made her choice years ago, choosing Ella's lies over truth. Now she lived with those consequences. Derek Jones had expanded his investigation firm into a national operation, his reputation built on exposing Ella and Roy's network. He still handled sensitive matters for Alessandro, maintaining their profitable partnership. The new security protocols are in place, Jenna reported. Derek's team vetted everyone personally. Alessandro had learned his lessons well. Trust was earned through years of loyalty, and even then, verification never stopped. His empire was built on competence and fearsome reputation, but maintained through constant vigilance. Later that evening, Alessandro visited one of the Foundation's shelters. The residents didn't know who he was. He preferred to observe anonymously, seeing how his resources helped others rebuild. A woman told her story to a support group. "I thought I'd never recover. He took everything. My money, my confidence, my trust. But here, I found strength again." Alessandro listened from the doorway. These stories were familiar: betrayal, manipulation, theft. But unlike his own story, these had happier endings. The Foundation provided legal aid, financial support, and professional training, giving victims tools to rebuild and protect themselves. Back in his penthouse office, Alessandro reviewed the latest expansion plans. The Foundation was opening branches internationally, spreading its mission globally. Each facility would bear the Cole name, a reminder that justice could rise from betrayal. His phone buzzed. Linda joined him for a late meeting. "The new legal team is ready, all thoroughly vetted, all committed to the mission." And their backgrounds? Clean. Derek's team went back 3 generations. No connections to any of our old friends. They had learned to be thorough. Success bred enemies, and the Cole Empire had many. But Alessandro's reputation for dealing with betrayal kept most threats at bay. Those who didn't heed the warnings learned harsh lessons. "There's something else," Linda added. "Remember Terrence Baxter's family, the hit-and-run victim? His daughter just graduated law school. Top of her class. She's applying for our legal aid program. Hire her." Alessandro decided immediately. Let her help others get justice. It was fitting. The tragedy that had exposed Ella and Roy's crimes now contributed to helping other victims. Justice had a way of coming full circle. Years of watching Ella and Roy's downfall had taught valuable lessons. Their empire, built on betrayal and murder, had crumbled. But Alessandro's empire, built on exposing truth and delivering consequences, grew stronger each year. The Foundation's success particularly satisfied him. Using the recovered money from Ella's theft to help other victims was perfect justice. Each person helped was another victory, another testament to the consequences of betrayal. Gina entered with the night's final reports. "Gavin's on the move again. Got spooked in Ravenwood, heading east." Alessandro smiled slightly. A decade of running, looking over his shoulder, jumping at shadows. Gavin's punishment was psychological, but no less effective. "Let him run," Alessandro replied. "Fear is a better teacher than pain." The city lights spread out below his office, a landscape he had helped reshape. The Cole name now stood for justice and consequences, a warning to those who would betray trust and a beacon for those seeking to rebuild. His phone buzzed again. Detective Wallace sending a final case update before her retirement. Another fraud exposed, another criminal enterprise dismantled. Their partnership, though never officially acknowledged, had served justice well. "Sir," Gina's voice carried a hint of amusement. "Ella's latest prison interview request was denied. She's claiming she has important information to share." After 10 years, Alessandro shook his head. She never learned, still trying to manipulate, still thinking she can bargain. But her bargaining power was long gone. The truth had stripped away her weapons, leaving her with nothing but regret and time to contemplate her choices. The next morning brought news about Roy. Another inmate with cartel connections had tried to reach him in solitary. The attempt failed, but Roy's terror grew. He'd spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, just like Gavin. Alessandro reviewed the morning's Foundation reports. 3 new success stories. a woman who rebuilt her business after partner theft, a man who recovered from financial fraud, a family that had escaped domestic abuse, each one representing justice served, lives rebuilt. The 10-year impact report is ready, Jinnah announced. The numbers are impressive. They were more than numbers. They were victories. Each person helped was another blow against betrayal, another testament to the power of justice. The Cole Empire stood as proof that betrayal's consequences were inevitable. Alessandro had transformed personal pain into a force for good. His revenge served as both warning and inspiration. He opened his project file one last time, adding a final entry. 10 years. Justice served. Lessons taught. Legacy established. The truth echoes through time, and consequences never fade. He closed the file and turned to the window. Creston City spread before him, changed by his influence, but not by his methods. He had achieved everything through legal means, letting truth be his weapon and justice his vindication. The chessboard waited on his desk, a new game in progress. But the old game, the one that had started at Paula's wedding, had ended in perfect checkmate. His opponents had never seen it coming, never understood until too late that their own actions would be their downfall. Alessandro Cole had turned betrayal into an empire of justice, personal pain into public good. His name now stood for consequences, swift, legal, and inevitable. The lesson was clear. Trust, once broken, was gone forever. Loyalty, when proven, deserved reward. And betrayal always had consequences. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.